Welcome to the Pump and Dump channel for another video, this time looking at the Lundin Mining Corporation. They had two news items out over the weekend, both negative, one a fatality at the Neves-Corvo mine in Portugal, and the other one was some damaged equipment at the Chapada mine in Brazil, which seems to have brought the whole thing to a standstill, it seems. I'm going to look at the performance on the day. You can see here on the Swedish exchange it ended down 5 Swedish crowns, almost 10%, and on the Toronto exchange it rebounded midday and managed to recover to just a 6% loss on the day, which is, I would say, about 3 Swedish crowns of loss. So I'm going to look at the news items, these two news items, press releases, and I'm going to compare what I think the real impact is to the company overall for the day, for these two events. And then I'm going to also provide my personal, like the way I look at it, my personal way of thinking from a standpoint of I don't know all the facts, I need to assume the worst, how I would quantify, you know, the loss to the value of the stock in in risk, in terms of looking at the risk, just pricing in potential risks. And then at the end of the video I'm also going to give my opinions on whether the stock price is overvalued, undervalued, fairly valued at this point in time. So getting to the two news items, I'm going to look at this strictly from an investor perspective. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything here. I'm just going to say how I see it when I'm looking at it in terms of investing. So there's not really much information as to what has happened here, whose fault it is. Was the person to blame themselves, or taking some risk they shouldn't have, or was something not were the procedures not set up properly for how to handle certain situations? Were the people not trained properly, or whatever? Could it be the company's fault? That's the thing we need to think about here. So they don't really know what's happened. They're not giving us the full information, the full story. They have a third party investigating it, so we'll probably have to wait until they finish their investigation, and we probably won't know for quite some time what has really happened. So we just have to deal with what we have. And you can see here they mentioned that they suspended operations following the incident, and they're planning to resume work midweek, so Wednesday or Thursday. I would say that yeah, around Wednesday or Thursday we probably will see maybe a press release saying that they're going to resume operations, and they're just mentioning here that they're sealing off or just leaving out the immediate area where the accident took place. So looking at this, in terms of an impact on the company itself, I mean, they're going to lose 2 or 3 days of production, which might be made up by overtime or not, who really knows. But yeah, that's like 1% of working days that's lost. It's relatively meaningless impact to the financial performance of this company. And then you have to also look at the fatality, like maybe they have to pay the family a compensation, let's say $1 million if it's the company's fault that the person died. And if they pay $1 million, and when you look at a company that's got a present value of about 4 billion in, just looking at the market cap, that's relatively meaningless. It's nothing to the company. So overall, this news item here, this is relatively meaningless. It doesn't hold any implications to loss in value that's so severe that you cannot recover it. So it's the way it is. Now, looking at it from the standpoint of I don't know exactly what happens, but this is just bad news, and I don't like this Corvus Neves mine. I don't want it, and and I'm just going to take it if I get it at a discount type of attitude. You slash it by half. It's the smallest mine that the Lundin Mining Corporation has. It's got a present value of about 62 million at this point in time. So if you slash that in half, that's 30 million USD, which is about half a Swedish crown impact on the fair value of the company. So this is relatively meaningless to the investors. The investor will look at this and just like brush it off and be like, who cares? Now, looking at the next item here, some damaged equipment. You can see here they talk about power outage and when it was restored, blah blah blah, and it resulted in significant damage to all four SAG and ball mill motors. So these motors, this equipment is damaged significantly. That sounds bad. This could mean that they need to repair this stuff, and that might take some time, or maybe they have to replace it, buy new things, ship it over there and install it and test it and everything, and that's also bad. So in either case, you know, this is bad. And you can see here as a consequence of this, what you can look at as lost production, lost earnings due to the time effect, and also a direct impact of having to replace this in terms of cost. You can see that the company here has mentioned that the 4-year production, cash cost and capital expenditure guidance for the mine has been withdrawn. And of course they'll give us some updates as appropriate, blah blah blah. So if you're looking at this part here, this is the negative aspect in this press release. You have to assume, like, what does it cost to replace these motors? Are they really expensive? How much do they cost? Do they cost $1 million each, or 10 million each, or 100,000 each? Who really knows? And then you also have to take into account the real problem is that you lose all this production time whilst you're fixing and replacing these things, and that could be weeks, months of production that is lost, and that is, you know, quite significant. And you know, in terms of that, you don't necessarily know what it's going to lead to in terms of losses to the company, so you have to be, you know, really, let's say, conservative here, and you know, use any kind of means of discounting, you know, to the best extent that you can. And as I just mentioned with the Corvus Neves mine, if you just like slash the present value by half, that would lead to yeah, with the Chapada mine being valued at this point in time at about 425 million US dollars, that would lead to like a 200 and something million dollars loss, which would be 2.5 Swedish crowns. That's, you know, the way to look at it when you have no idea as to what the impact will be. Now there is one positive in here. They carry a business interruption insurance, and of course the terms of that is not known to the marketplace. We don't know. I mean, unless you have the policy at your hand, you cannot really make any real assumption as to what that means. Does that mean that they get compensated a fixed amount or up to a threshold for any lost revenue due to business interruption like this? Might they get 10 million, 50 million, or whatever the impact is to the loss in lost earnings? Will they get that compensated is the question here, and in that case, you know, the impact could be rather negligible. On the positive side, you could say even, you know, like if they get compensated for all the money they lost whilst they are replacing and fixing this issue, they will, you know, get that money and just keep the metal in the ground, and that will lead to you know, an actual increase in the value of the company. So there is a potential that this whole thing, whilst it looks really bad, it's a nothing burger, and you know, time will tell. So you know, looking at it from the perspective, as I mentioned, you know, assuming everything is bad about this whole thing here, I would say 2.5 Swedish crowns for this and half a Swedish crown for that would give me a 3 Swedish crown decline, which you can see is basically reflected in how the Toronto market closed here. But on the positive side, if there is really next to no impact financially, you know, this could go back these 5 Swedish crowns right away. So that's basically how I see it. Final point, valuation of the stock itself, it was at 52.95 on Friday when it closed, and yeah, it's down at 47.84, and with you know, a rebound here, let's say 50 Swedish crowns, it is cheap, because the fair value I had for it previously was 61.5 Swedish crowns before this incident, and after this incident I think 1.5 Swedish crowns probably covers it. So let's say 60 Swedish crowns would be the fair value of the stock to me at this point in time. So it is substantially undervalued, and also with this company, one has to understand that it's a low risk company. It has low leverage. It has a low risk and a low return, of course. And obviously, low risk and high return very rarely exist. But in this case, it's a low risk, low return company, and therefore, because there is a substantial discount to the present value at the current metals prices, one has to look at this as something that has a very good risk-adjusted return to buying it right now. Of course, that doesn't mean it doesn't go lower tomorrow. I mean, maybe the market is jittery tomorrow and it keeps falling a bit more, and eventually it bottoms out and then it rebounds, because that's just the way markets work. So that's kind of my opinion. That's how I see it. That's my analysis. Don't want to bring up my spreadsheet and confuse people too much, because even if I brought up my spreadsheet, you cannot really capture the whole thing very easily, and therefore I just present the numbers off the top of my head as I have worked them out myself. So this is how I see it. This is my opinion, and with that said, always remember, this is not investment advice or recommendations to buy or not to buy this stock. I mean, everyone can make their own decision. One other thing I need to mention about the Chapada mine is that whilst it's possible that the losses in revenue of the company will be covered by this insurance, there is the royalty to Yamana Gold, which I think is 25 million per year. I don't think this business interruption will cover that, and even if the company doesn't operate, they still have to pay Yamana 25 million a year as long as the gold price is above 1500, I think it was. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at for Lundin Mining Corporation. If you have any questions, comments, or opinions, you can leave them in the comments section. If you like the content, don't forget to subscribe, and have a good day.